Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're attempting to dismantle one of the most stubborn myths in the travel world.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one.
It really is. It's a myth that I think most of us are totally guilty of buying into at some point, which is this idea of quote unquote Italian culture.
Right, the monolith.
Exactly. You know the drill. It's this one big happy boot-shaped family where everyone eats pasta and talks with their hands and drives a Vespa and, naps in the afternoon.
Yeah, the eat, pray, love version of reality.
Yes, perfectly said.
It's a very comforting image, but it's completely fabricated.
It really is, because looking at the research we've pulled for today, and this ranges from historical analyses of the Risorgimento all the way to modern culinary anthropology, that monolithic idea isn't just slightly off, it's fundamentally wrong.
Totally wrong.
The sources basically suggest that if you treat Italy as one single country, you're missing the point entirely.
You really are. And honestly, it's a mistake that frustrates Italians to no end. There's actually a very specific word that kept popping up in the literature we reviewed today.
Campanile.
Campanile. That comes from campanile, right? Like the bell tower.
Precisely. The concept is that your loyalty and really your core identity only extend as far as the sound of your village's church bell.
Wow.
Yeah, beyond that, you're basically in foreign territory. So the mission for this deep dive is to stop looking at Italy as a single entity and start looking at the 5 distinct nations that just happen to share a peninsula.
So we're going on a grand tour, so to speak.
That's a plan.
We're moving north to south, hitting the Veneto, then Lombardy, Tuscany, Rome, and finally Sicily. And the big takeaway here for you listening seems to be that Italy's a toddler in historical terms.
That's the absolutely key context to keep in mind. Italy, as a unified political state, has only existed since 1861.
Which is wild, right? That's younger than the United States.
Yeah.
For the previous 1,500 years, these regions weren't just neighbors. They were often bitter enemies. They were separate empires looking in completely different directions geographically and culturally.
Well, let's start with that first direction. We're dropping into the northeast, the Veneto, Venice. Now, I think the common perception of Venice is all about romance.
Oh, yeah, sure. Gondolas, honeymoon, sunsets on the Grand Canal.
Exactly. But the history here paints a picture of a ruthless corporate machine.
Ruthless is actually a great way to put it. You have to remember, for a millennium, Venice wasn't part of Italy. It was the most serene republic.
Which sounds very peaceful, but
it was a massive maritime empire that essentially turned its back on Europe and looked east.
to Byzantium and the Ottomans.
Exactly. While the rest of Europe was mired in the dark ages of feudalism, just stuck in the mud, Venice was building the first assembly line in history.
The arsenal, I was reading about this in the sources, they could churn out a fully rigged warship in a single day.
One ship a day in the 1500s.
That is insane industrial capacity.
It really is. And that dominance shaped the city physically.
Right.
If you look at St. Mark's Basilica, it's really confusing if you're expecting a traditional Roman church.
Well, it's very squat.
Squat wide and just covered in these elaborate gold mosaics.
It honestly looks like it belongs in Istanbul.
Because stylistically, it basically does. That's the Italo-Byzantine style.
Mm-hmm.
They were flexing their connection to the East. They were explicitly saying to the world, we aren't Romans. We are the true successors to Constantinople.
And this Eastern orientation completely changes the menu, too. I think a lot of tourists land in Venice expecting, the best spaghetti marinara of their lives, and they're inevitably disappointed.
Yeah, they are. Because the sources are very clear on this. Pasta is not the indigenous carb here.
Right.
It's a lagoon culture. It's wet. It's marshy. You can't grow wheat there, but you can grow rice. So the historical staple is risi e bizi, which is rice and peas.
It's almost a soup. Right?
Very much so. Very comforting. Or polenta. But the most telling dish, the one that really encapsulates their history, is bacalao mantecada.
Which is creamed dried cod. But here's the question I had when I was looking at the notes. Cod is an Atlantic fish. Venice is in the Adriatic. How does an Atlantic fish become the signature dish of a Mediterranean lagoon?
That is the sheer power of Venetian trade. Their sailors were going all the way to Norway. And they needed food that wouldn't rot on those months-long voyages.
Right, of course.
So they brought back stockfish, wind-dried cod. They rehydrated it, whipped it with oil, and turned it into a delicacy. It's literally a dish born out of long-distance logistics.
That makes perfect sense. And then you have sard in Sar, sardines with raisins and pine nuts.
Which just screams Arab influence. Mixing fish with sweet dried fruit is a very Middle Eastern technique. It was also a clever preservation method using sweet and sour vinegar to keep the fish edible on boats.
So when you eat that, you're basically eating the legacy of the Silk Road. So if I'm a traveler in Venice and I want to do this right, I'm avoiding the sit-down pasta joint. What's the actual move?
You engage with cicchetti. It's the Venetian version of tapas. You don't sit down. You go to a Baccaro, which is a small local wine bar, and you order an ombra, a tiny glass of wine.
Why is it called an ombra? Because that translates to shade. Right.
It does. Historically, the wine sellers in St. Mark's Square would move their stalls throughout the day to stay in the shadow of the bell tower. They followed the shade to keep the wine cool. So you'd say to your friend, let's go get a shade.
That is fantastic.
It's a very social, standing room only culture. You grab a meatball, a little salt cod on toast, drink your wine, and move to the next place. It's completely antithetical to the heavy three-course Italian dinner.
The travel advice from the sources here is pretty blunt, actually. It just says get lost.
Literally get lost.
Yeah.
The main thoroughfares like the Rialto or St. Mark's are basically Disney World at this point.
Right.
But Venice is an actual living city. If you walk 20 minutes toward the northern lagoon into the Cannaregio district, the tourists just vanish. You see locals buying groceries. You see the silent squares. That's the real Serene Republic.
All right, let's hop on the train and move west. We are leaving the lagoon, crossing the flat plains, and hitting Lombardy, Milan. And the vibe shift in the documents is instant. We go from faded aquatic glory to aggressive efficiency.
It is night and day. If the South is about slow living, Lombardy is the engine room of the country. This is where the money is made.
And the geography really dictates that, doesn't it? It's the Po Valley. It's completely flat. It's not those rolling hills of Tuscany we always picture.
Right. It's a massive alluvial plain. Historically, this was a natural corridor for armies. Everyone marched through Lombardy to get to Rome. So over the centuries, the Milanese were ruled by the Spanish, the French under Napoleon, and crucially, the Austrians.
The Austrian influence was genuinely surprising to me. I do not associate Italy with Austrian bureaucracy.
But that's exactly why Milan works the way it does. The Austrians brought a very specific administrative style, regimented, organized, ambitious. The Milanese absorbed that work ethic. It's why the city feels much closer to Zurich or Munich than it does to, say, Naples.
And this brings us to one of my favorite concepts from this research, the butter line.
Ah, yes. The invisible lipid border.
Explain this for the listener, because I think we all just assume Italian food universally equals olive oil.
That's a huge misconception.
Yeah.
Olive trees do not like the cold, damp winters of the Po Valley. But you know what loves that climate? Cows. So Lombardy is dairy country. South of the Apennines, they cook with oil. In Lombardy, they cook with butter.
And you really see that in the risotto alla Milanese.
Oh yeah, it's rich, it's heavy, it's laden with butter and cheese, and it's yellow.
Because of the saffron.
Which again is a massive status symbol.
Yeah.
Saffron is the most expensive spice in the world. Milan has always been a wealthy banking and trade city. Putting literal gold color in your rice was a way of showing off your wealth.
And then there's a meat dish, the cotoletta.
The breaded veal cutlet. Now, if you look at it, it looks exactly like a Wiener Schnitzel. There is a huge ongoing historical debate about who invented it first, whether the Austrians or the Milanese, but the connection is undeniable. It's an Alpine Central European dish, not a Mediterranean one.
Milan also feels visually different. It feels taller, more imposing. You have the Duomo.
The Duomo is a perfect example of this non-Italian identity. It's Gothic. Real spiky, towering French and German-style Gothic. It doesn't look anything like the rounded Romanesque churches of the South. And it took 600 years to finish. It really represents that stubborn industrial determination.
The notes mention that while Venice is all about the past, Milan is about the now. Fashion, design, finance.
It's a city of interiors. In Rome, the beauty is out on the street for everyone to see. In Milan, the streets can actually be a bit gray and industrial. The real beauty is hidden inside the private courtyards, inside the design showrooms, inside the exclusive clubs. You have to be invited in.
Which brings us to their big social ritual, the aperitivo. In the U.S., happy hour is usually about cheap beer and chicken wings. This seems much grander.
It's a complete lifestyle statement.
Right.
Between 6 and 8 p.m., the work completely stops. You go to a nice bar, you order a Negroni Sbagliato.
Sbagliato means mistaken right.
Yes.
Yes.
The story goes, a bartender grabbed sparkling wine instead of gin by mistake, and a classic was born. But the deal is you buy one drink, and you get access to a full buffet of food. It's not just peanuts. It's fresh pasta salads, cured meats. It's incredibly civilized. But the key rule, as per our sources, is you have to dress the part.
No flip-flops in Milan.
Absolutely not. Milan is a highly visual city. People will judge you by your shoes. You need to look sharp.
Okay, let's cross the Apennines, that spine of mountains running down the center of the country, and drop into Tuscany. This is the postcard Italy. Rolling hills, cypress trees, Chianti.
The absolute heartland. This is where the modern Italian language was born, thanks to Dante. But politically, Tuscany is a really fascinating anomaly.
Because it wasn't a kingdom, right?
Right. While the north had foreign overlords and the south had kings, Florence was a republic. But you have to understand, it wasn't a democracy in the modern sense. It was an oligarchy run entirely by merchants, specifically bankers.
The Medici family.
The Medici, the Pazzi, the Strozzi. These families basically invented modern banking. They invented the letter of credit, which allowed trade to flow safely across Europe. But here's the catch. Usury, which is charging interest on loans, was considered a sin, a mortal sin.
So they were all convinced they were going to hell.
That was the genuine fear. And the sources suggest that a lot of the Renaissance art we love today, the chapels, the statues, was essentially spiritual money laundering.
Spiritual money laundering. I love that phrase. So Michelangelo was funded by banker guilt.
In a way, yes. They were buying their way out of purgatory by beautifying the city for the public. But it was also about fierce competition. My dome is bigger than yours. My David statue is more impressive than yours. That ego-driven competition between banking families gave us the greatest concentration of art in Western history.
But here is the paradox I found so fascinating in the reading. You have the richest people in Europe living in these grand palaces, but the food culture is basically peasant food. Cucina povera.
It is surprisingly humble. If you go to a fancy dinner in Florence today, you are essentially eating elevated leftovers. Ribollita, that's literally just yesterday's bean soup reboiled with stale bread. Panzanella. Stale bread salad.
And speaking of the bread, we have to talk about the saltless bread mystery. The notes say if you eat Tuscan bread for the first time, it tastes like cardboard because there's literally zero salt in the dough. Why would they do that?
It all goes back to a medieval tax dispute. Pisa, which was their rival city on the coast, controlled the salt trade. They jacked up the taxes on salt specifically to punish Florence.
So the Florentines just said, fine, we just won't use it.
Exactly. It was a pure spite move. We would rather eat bland bread than pay Pisa a single dime. And 800 years later, they were still baking it that exact same way. It's just pure stubbornness.
There is one major exception to the peasant food rule, though, the steak.
Oh, the bistecca alla Fiorentina. That is the showstopper. It's this massive T-bone from the Canina cattle. Those giant white cows you see in the Tuscan fields. It's grilled over a wood fire, served very rare and sold by the kilogram. It's incredibly primal.
The warning in our sources regarding Florence specifically is pretty severe, though. They call it Disneyfication.
It's a very real problem. Florence is geographically small. It's a medieval, walled city trying to handle millions of tourists. It gets completely crushed.
So how do you actually hack it as a traveler?
You have to time shift. You walk the streets at 7 in the morning or at 11 at night. But really, the best advice is to get out. Rent a car. Tuscany is a rural region at heart. The real magic is in the Val d'Orcia, or the Chianti Hills, sitting at an agriturismo drinking wine that was made 50 feet from your table. That's the real Tuscany.
All right, moving south again. We enter the region of Lazio and the capital.
Rome, the eternal city.
Yeah.
And if Florence is tidy and artistic, Rome is heavy.
It really does feel heavier.
It's colossal, and it's chaotic. You have to remember, for 1,000 years, Rome wasn't just a city, it was a theocracy. It was the capital of the Papal States. The Pope wasn't just a guy on a balcony praying. He was an absolute monarch with a standing army.
Which really explains the scale of St. Peter's. When you're standing there, that's not a parish church. That's an imperial palace.
And it was funded by tithes from all over Europe. Rome didn't actually produce anything. It didn't have the industry of Milan or the maritime trade of Venice. It consumed. It imported taxes and pilgrims, and it exported religion. That created a very strange, cynical dynamic in the local population that you can still feel today.
The famous Roman cynical wit.
Exactly. They've seen every emperor, pope, and conqueror come and go. They aren't impressed by anyone's power anymore.
Let's talk about the food here, because this is my personal favorite category. Roman food is intense. It is not subtle at all.
It's pungent. It's salty. It relies heavily on the quid and quarto, which translates to the fifth quarter.
Explain that term for us.
So historically, when they slaughtered an animal in Rome, the first quarter of the meat went to the nobility, the second to the clergy, the third to the merchants, and the fourth to the soldiers. What was left? The guts. The offal. the fifth quarter.
So the working class basically got the intestines and the tails?
Yes, and they became absolute geniuses at cooking them. Trippa alla romana, which is tripe. Coda alla vaccanara, which is oxtail stew. It's poor man's food elevated to high art.
And then you have what the sources call the pasta
A
trinity.
holy trinity of Roman carbs. Cacio e pepe carbonara and amatriciana. Notice what they all have in common.
Pecorino cheese and black pepper.
Sheep cheese. Because the countryside around Rome, the Lazio region, was historically sheep country. Shepherds would carry dried pasta, a hard chunk of pecorino and black pepper. It doesn't spoil in the heat. It's essentially ancient fast food.
And we can't ignore the Jewish influence here either. The Roman ghetto is one of the oldest in the world.
It's a crucial layer of the city's identity. The Jewish community has been there since the Roman Empire, long before the popes arrived. Carciofi alla Judia are deep-fried whole artichokes that look like these beautiful golden sunflowers. That's a historically Jewish dish that became a definitive Roman symbol.
The big travel tip for Rome from the research is don't trust the metro.
It's practically useless. They have 2.5 lines for a massive European capital.
Why is that? Are they just bad at digging tunnels?
No, they're too good at history. Every single time they stick a shovel in the ground, they hit a Roman villa or an ancient mosaic, and all construction stops for 5 years of meticulous archaeology. So in Rome, you walk. You explore the cobblestone neighborhoods like Monte or Trastevere. That's where the actual pulse of the city is.
Okay, we are making our final jump, and this feels like the biggest cultural shift of the entire tour. We are crossing the Strait of Messina down into Sicily.
This is where the concept of Italy really gets stretched to its breaking point. If you talk to locals there, they will very often tell you, I am Sicilian first, Italian second.
Being an island obviously helps that separation, but it's also their geographic position, right? It's basically the doormat of the Mediterranean.
Everyone wiped their feet on Sicily. The Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans, the French, the Spanish. They all invaded, they all ruled for time, and they all left something behind.
The architecture described in the notes sounds wild. They call it Sicilian Baroque.
It's much darker and more flamboyant than anything in the north. But if you look at something like the Palatine Chapel in Palermo, it's mind-blowing. You have Norman arches built by French Vikings, supported by classical Greek columns, all covered in Arab mosaics with Islamic inscriptions. It's a literal physical clash of civilizations.
And that clash is most obvious in the food. The sources describe Sicilian food as the original fusion cuisine.
It really is. You have the heavy Arab influence like couscous. In Western Sicily, they eat fish couscous, they don't eat pasta. The Arabs also brought sugar, citrus, apricots, cinnamon.
And yet the street food scene in Palermo sounds incredibly visceral.
It's hardcore. The prime example is the pani camusa.
The spleen sandwich.
Sliced veal spleen, cooked slowly in lard, served on a soft bun with a bunch of caciocavallo cheese.
That is a very bold choice for lunch.
It's intense.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to poor people's food. It's about utilizing every single available calorie. And the street markets in Palermo, like the Vucciria or the Ballarò, they feel way more like North African souks. The sights, the smells, the vendors shouting at you. It doesn't feel like Europe. It feels like the deep Mediterranean.
On the sweeter side, though, we have what might be the best breakfast of champions.
Granita. Shaved ice made with fresh local almonds or lemons, served alongside a warm brioche bun. And yes, it is perfectly socially acceptable to eat ice cream and bread for breakfast in Sicily.
That is a culture I can definitely get behind.
Right.
But there's a real mindset shift down there, too. They talk about il dolce far niente.
The sweetness of doing nothing. But there's also a deep undercurrent of fatalism. You have to remember, they're living under an active volcano. Mount Etna is always smoking. The earth literally shakes. And historically, the government has always been distant or corrupt. So there is this pervasive cultural sense of enjoy today because who knows what happens tomorrow.
So the practical travel tip here is really just to embrace the chaos.
Traffic lights are mostly suggestions. Schedules are very rough estimates. You really have to respect the riposo, which is the afternoon shutdown. Don't try to go shopping at 2 p.m. The shutters are down.
Yeah.
Go have a long lunch. Have a nap. You have to adopt their rhythm.
So looking back, we've gone from the misty, industrious, butter-eating, punctual north to the chaotic, sun-drenched, olive oil-soaked, fatalistic south.
And that right there is the mosaic.
It really changes how you see the country. It's not just Italian.
No, it's not. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, it completely explains why the country functions or dysfunctions the way it does today. The geography of the Alps versus the sea and the history of bankers versus popes versus invaders created entirely distinct nations. We just happen to call them regions now for convenience.
So, for you listening, the next time you are planning a trip or even just ordering dinner at a restaurant, what is the actionable advice here?
Stop asking for Italian food. Ask yourself, which Italy is this? Are you eating the food of a Venetian sailor who needed to preserve fish for a long voyage? Are you eating the food of a Milanese factory owner showing off with gold saffron? A Tuscan peasant trying to save stale bread? Or a Sicilian Arab prince?
Because the context completely flavors the food?
It makes the experience infinitely richer.
And here is a final thought to leave you with. We live in a world of really aggressive globalization right now. Every high street starts to look exactly the same. You can get a Starbucks in Milan, and you can get that exact same Starbucks in Seattle.
Sadly true.
But in Italy, these fierce regional identities, this campanile, this absolute stubbornness about the exact right way to make a pasta dish, or the immense pride in their specific local dialect, that intense friction might be the very thing that saves their unique cultures from disappearing into the global melting pot.
I think you're absolutely right. The fragmentation is actually their greatest strength.
Yeah.
It prevents them from ever becoming generic.
A feature, not a bug. Well, thanks for taking this grand tour with us today. Go find some authentic cacio e pepe, or maybe be brave and try the spleen sandwich, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.